In a quiet little town where everyone seemed to know each other, tensions simmered beneath the surface. The town wasn't known for its diversity, and racial divides often lingered unspoken but ever present. One sunny afternoon, 17-year-old Maya was driving home from school, her mind focused on an upcoming debate competition. Her car's broken taillight flickered faintly, though she hadn't noticed it yet. It was just another ordinary day, or so she thought. As Maya turned onto a familiar street, blue and red lights flashed behind her. She pulled over calmly, her heart beating a little faster. Officer Karen Hayes approached the driver's side window, her expression stern. "License and registration," she demanded without so much as a greeting. Maya complied quickly, handing over the documents with a polite smile. But something about Karen's demeanor felt off. Her tone was sharp, almost accusatory, and Maya couldn't help but feel uneasy. Karen glanced at the papers before looking up at Maya. "Do you know why I stopped you?" she asked, her voice dripping with suspicion. Maya shook her head. "No, ma'am. Was I speeding?" Karen ignored her question and pointed to the taillight. "That's broken. You should have fixed it by now." Maya nodded apologetically, promising to take care of it as soon as possible. But Karen wasn't satisfied. She leaned closer, scrutinizing Maya's appearance. "You seem awfully calm for someone who got pulled over," Karen remarked, narrowing her eyes. Maya hesitated, unsure how to respond. "I'm sorry if I came across that way." "I didn't mean anything wrong," she said softly. Karen frowned, clearly displeased. "You don't sound very remorseful to me." The situation escalated quickly when Karen suddenly accused Maya of having an unusual hairstyle that supposedly obstructed proper identification. Maya's braids, neatly styled and part of her cultural identity, became the focal point of Karen's frustration. "This isn't regulation," Karen snapped, gesturing toward Maya's hair. Confused and growing anxious, Maya tried to explain. "It's just my hair, ma'am. It doesn't block anyone from seeing my face." But Karen wasn't listening. In a move that shocked even herself later, she ordered Maya out of the car and placed her in handcuffs. Passers-by began to gather, watching in stunned silence as Karen dragged Maya to the back of her patrol vehicle. Without warning or explanation, Karen retrieved a pair of scissors and began cutting away at Maya's braids. Each snip echoed like thunder in the tense air, leaving Maya trembling with humiliation. Tears streamed down her face as clumps of her hair fell to the ground. By the time Karen stepped back, Maya's once proud braids were reduced to uneven stubble. The crowd gasped, some recording the scene on their phones while others shouted protests. Maya sat there, frozen in disbelief, feeling stripped of not just her hair, but also her dignity. Little did Karen know, this reckless act would set off a chain reaction far beyond what she could have imagined. For now, though, all Maya wanted was to disappear, to escape the stares, the whispers, and the unbearable weight of what had just happened. When Judge Elijah Thompson finally stepped forward, the entire nation watched with bated breath. Dressed in a crisp suit, his tall frame exuded authority, but it was the look in his eyes that caught everyone's attention, pain mixed with resolve. Standing beside him was Maya, her head now covered by a soft scarf, her expression calm yet weary. The press conference was held in their modest backyard, a deliberate choice to keep things intimate and personal. As cameras rolled and reporters scribbled notes, Judge Thompson began to speak. "Good afternoon," he said, his deep voice steady but laced with emotion. "I stand here today not just as a father, but as someone who has spent his life working toward justice for all people, regardless of race, creed, or circumstance." He paused, glancing at Maya, who gave him a small nod of encouragement. "What happened to my daughter is not an isolated incident. It is part of a pattern, a symptom of a system that continues to fail those it claims to serve." He recounted the events leading up to the traffic stop, describing how Officer Hayes had singled out Maya for something as trivial as a broken taillight. His tone grew heavier as he spoke about the moment Maya's hair was shaved off. "Imagine being told your identity," Your culture, your pride, is somehow a problem. Imagine being stripped of your dignity in front of strangers, simply because someone decided you were less than human. His words resonated deeply, drawing murmurs of agreement from the crowd gathered outside the fence. Judge Thompson then shifted focus to the broader implications of the incident. This isn't just about Maya, he emphasized, his voice rising slightly. It's about every child who walks this earth carrying the weight of stereotypes and prejudice. It's about parents who fear for their children's safety, not because they've done anything wrong, but because of the color of their skin. He went on to describe the countless stories he'd heard during his years on the bench. Families torn apart by wrongful arrests, lives shattered by unchecked power, dreams crushed under the heel of systemic racism. Maya listened intently, her fingers clutching the edges of her scarf. When her father invited her to say a few words, she hesitated before stepping forward. Her voice trembled at first, but as she spoke, it grew stronger. "I never thought something like this could happen to me," she admitted, looking directly into the cameras. "But I realize now that I'm not alone. There are so many others who have gone through worse and haven't had a chance to tell their story." She thanked the community for rallying around her, adding, "I don't want anyone else to feel the way I did that day. We deserve better." The room fell silent as Judge Thompson concluded the press conference with a powerful call to action. "We cannot allow this moment to pass without change," he declared. "Accountability must be demanded, not just for Officer Hayes, but for systems that enable such behavior. Reform is long overdue." His final words hung in the air. "Let this be a turning point, a reminder that justice begins when we see each other as equals." As the cameras clicked and reporters shouted follow-up questions, Maya and her father stood side by side, united. For the first time since the incident, Maya felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, her story could spark something bigger, a movement toward fairness, understanding, and healing. And behind them, the community rallied, ready to fight alongside them. As journalists dug deeper into the story, they began uncovering details about Maya's life that painted a starkly different picture from the one Officer Hayes had assumed. To Karen, Maya was just another teenager, a faceless individual who needed to be put in her place. But as reporters spoke with teachers, classmates, and neighbors, a fuller image of Maya emerged, one that highlighted her brilliance, resilience, and dreams for the future. Maya wasn't your average high school student. She was an honor roll scholar known for her sharp mind and passion for justice. Her debate team coach described her as fearless, always ready to take on tough topics like inequality and systemic racism. Friends recalled how she spent hours tutoring younger students after school, determined to help them succeed. Beyond academics, Maya volunteered at a local shelter, organizing food drives and mentoring children. Those who knew her couldn't believe she'd been treated so harshly by someone meant to serve and protect. But what truly captured public attention was the revelation of Maya's family background. Her father, Judge Elijah Thompson, was no ordinary parent. A towering figure in the legal community, Judge Thompson had dedicated his career to advocating for fairness and equality within the justice system. Known for his eloquence and unwavering moral compass, he had presided over landmark cases addressing racial discrimination and police misconduct. His reputation extended far beyond their small town. People across the country respected him as a voice of reason and integrity. When reporters reached out to Judge Thompson for comment, he initially declined. The pain of seeing his daughter humiliated was still too fresh. Instead, he focused on supporting Maya, spending long hours talking to her, holding her hand, and reminding her of her worth. He encouraged her to express her feelings, whether through writing, drawing, or simply crying if she needed to. Family friends described him as both heartbroken and furious, not just for what happened to Maya, but for the larger implications of such unchecked prejudice. Despite his silence, Judge Thompson's name alone added gravity to the unfolding situation. Social media users quickly connected the dots, speculating about how Officer Hayes might react upon realizing whose child she had targeted. Memes and commentary flooded online platforms, mocking her lack of awareness. Many wondered aloud, had Karen bothered to ask Maya's last name before escalating the situation? Would she have acted differently if she'd known? Meanwhile, Maya struggled to process everything happening around her. Reporters camped outside her house, eager for a statement. Strangers sent messages of support, some even offering scholarships or mentorship opportunities. While touched by the kindness, Maya felt overwhelmed. She didn't want pity, she wanted understanding. She wanted people to see her as more than a victim, more than a headline. Judge Thompson eventually decided it was time to address the growing storm. He called a trusted journalist and agreed to an exclusive interview, but only under one condition. The focus would remain on systemic issues, not personal vendettas. When asked why he chose to speak up, he replied simply, "This is bigger than my daughter. It's about every young person who has ever been made to feel less than human because of the color of their skin." The announcement sent shockwaves through the nation. People tuned in eagerly, anticipating Judge Thompson's words. For many, this wasn't just a story anymore. It was a movement waiting to happen. And behind it all stood Maya, quiet but resolute, beginning to find strength in the very identity Officer Hayes had tried to strip away. The fallout from the press conference was swift and unrelenting. Officer Karen Hayes, once confident in her actions, began to feel the walls closing in around her. The weight of public scrutiny and mounting evidence against her became impossible to ignore. Internal Affairs launched a formal investigation into her conduct, while prosecutors reviewed the case for potential criminal charges. For the first time, Karen started to realize the gravity of what she had done and the consequences that awaited her. At first, Karen tried to downplay the situation. She claimed she was simply following protocol and accused critics of exaggerating her actions. "It's just hair," she muttered during one tense interview, seemingly oblivious to the deeper cultural and emotional significance of Maya's braids. But as more details emerged, her defenses crumbled. Past complaints against her surfaced, allegations of rude behavior, racial profiling, and unnecessary force, all quietly dismissed or buried by higher-ups who had turned a blind eye. Each revelation painted a damning picture of an officer who abused her power without accountability. Things took a dramatic turn when investigators discovered bodycam footage from the day of the incident. The video confirmed what witnesses had described: Karen's aggressive tone, her refusal to listen to Maya's explanations, and her deliberate decision to shave off the girl's hair despite no clear justification. The footage contradicted Karen's earlier claims that she acted out of necessity, leaving her with nowhere to hide. When confronted with the evidence, Karen stammered and stumbled over her words, unable to defend herself. As the case against her gained momentum, Karen's colleagues distanced themselves, eager to avoid association with her tarnished reputation. Once a respected figure within the department, she now found herself isolated, her coworkers avoiding eye contact in the hallways. Her superiors suspended her without pay, citing the need for transparency amid growing public pressure. Yet even this move did little to quell the outrage. Protesters continued to demand her termination, chanting slogans outside the police station and flooding social media with calls for justice. Desperate to salvage her career, Karen attempted to issue a public apology. In a carefully worded statement, she expressed regret for any harm caused and insisted she never intended to hurt anyone. But her words rang hollow. Critics pointed out that her apology lacked genuine remorse and failed to acknowledge the systemic issues at play. Judge Thompson dismissed it outright, calling it a calculated attempt to save face rather than take responsibility. Even some of Karen's former supporters began to distance themselves, recognizing that her actions were indefensible. Behind closed doors, Karen faced another kind of reckoning. Friends stopped returning her calls, and neighbors whispered behind her back. Her family, too, began to feel the strain. Her teenage son, once proud of his mother's role as a police officer, struggled to understand how she could have acted so cruelly. Arguments erupted at home, further isolating Karen from those she loved most. For the first time in her life, she felt truly alone. By the time prosecutors announced they would pursue criminal charges against her, Karen realized it was too late to undo the damage. She had underestimated the resilience of the community, the determination of Judge Thompson, and the power of Maya's story. What started as a routine traffic stop had spiraled into a national reckoning, one that exposed not only Karen's flaws, but also the cracks in a system that allowed such abuses to happen in the first place. As she sat in her quiet home, staring at the headlines accusing her of misconduct and assault, Karen finally understood the magnitude of her mistake. She had targeted a young girl without considering the ripple effects of her actions, or the fact that Maya wasn't just any teenager. She was the daughter of a man who had devoted his life to fighting for justice. And now, that same man was leading the charge to ensure Karen paid for what she had done. The video of Maya's encounter with Officer Karen Hayes spread like wildfire. Within hours, footage recorded by bystanders lit up social media platforms, drawing reactions from all corners of the country. The clip showed every painful moment. Maya's calm demeanor turning into quiet tears as her hair was shaved off, the crowd's gasps of disbelief, and Karen's unyielding determination to assert authority. It was raw, emotional, and impossible to ignore. Hashtags like #JusticeForMaya and #EnoughIsEnough began trending nationwide, amplifying calls for accountability. Locally, outrage boiled over almost immediately. Residents gathered outside the police station, holding signs that read "Respect our children" and "End police brutality." Protesters chanted Maya's name, demanding justice not just for her but for countless others who had suffered similar injustices in silence. Many shared personal stories of mistreatment at the hands of law enforcement, creating a groundswell of solidarity. Community leaders took to microphones, urging calm while vowing to fight for systemic change. Meanwhile, national news outlets picked up the story, broadcasting it far beyond the small town where it happened. Talk shows debated whether Officer Hayes' actions were justified or an egregious abuse of power. Pundits weighed in, some defending her right to enforce rules, while others condemned her behavior as cruel and unnecessary. The divide in public opinion only fueled more discussions about race, policing, and respect. For many, this incident wasn't just about Maya. It symbolized years of frustration with how marginalized communities were treated by those sworn to protect them. Back in the town, tensions ran high. Supporters of Officer Hayes argued that she was simply doing her job and being unfairly vilified. They claimed the media had blown things out of proportion and accused protesters of stirring trouble. But their voices were drowned out by the sheer volume of opposition. Even people who rarely engaged in activism found themselves joining marches or signing petitions. The issue had struck a nerve, igniting passions across generations. Amidst the chaos, Maya retreated into herself. She stopped answering calls from friends and avoided going outside, overwhelmed by the sudden attention. Her family tried to shield her as best they could, but the weight of what had happened pressed down on everyone. Neighbors brought meals and left encouraging notes, offering support in whatever way they could. Still, Maya couldn't shake the feeling of shame that clung to her like a shadow. Every time she passed a mirror, she saw not herself but the girl whose dignity had been stripped away in broad daylight. Officer Hayes, on the other hand, dug her heels in deeper. In interviews, she insisted she'd followed protocol and blamed the backlash on cancel culture. She dismissed critics as overly sensitive, refusing to acknowledge the pain she'd caused. But the more she defended herself, the angrier people became. Calls for her resignation grew louder, and petitions demanding her termination gained thousands of signatures overnight. The pressure mounted, yet Karen remained convinced she'd done nothing wrong. As days turned into weeks, the story refused to fade. Journalists started digging deeper, uncovering troubling details about Officer Hayes' past conduct. Complaints against her surfaced, allegations of rude behavior, racial profiling, and excessive force, all quietly swept under the rug until now. Each revelation added fuel to the fire, making it clear that this wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a pattern. People wondered, How many others had been victimized by her actions before Maya? And why had no one stepped in sooner? The community stood at a crossroads. Would this be another case forgotten once the headlines moved on? Or would it spark real change? For Maya and her loved ones, the answer mattered deeply. But for now, they braced themselves for what came next, knowing the battle was far from over. The aftermath of the trial marked a new chapter for everyone involved, but perhaps none more so than Maya. The scars of that day would always linger, both visible and invisible, but she was determined not to let them define her. With the unwavering support of her family and community, she began rebuilding her life, channeling her pain into purpose. She decided to pursue a degree in criminal justice, driven by a desire to become a civil rights attorney who could advocate for those without a voice. Her dream wasn't just personal. It was deeply rooted in the belief that no one should suffer the way she had. Maya's transformation inspired those around her. Friends noticed how she carried herself with newfound confidence, speaking openly about her experiences and encouraging others to do the same. She started mentoring younger students, particularly girls of color, teaching them to embrace their identities and stand tall in the face of adversity. "Your worth isn't defined by what someone else says or does to you," she often told them. "You are enough, exactly as you are." These words resonated deeply, creating ripples of empowerment far beyond her immediate circle. Judge Elijah Thompson continued his advocacy work, using his platform to push for systemic change on a larger scale. He established the Maya Thompson Foundation, named after his daughter, to provide resources and scholarships for victims of racial injustice. The foundation also funded programs aimed at educating law enforcement officers about cultural sensitivity and implicit bias. Judge Thompson traveled across the country, delivering speeches and hosting workshops to foster dialogue between communities and police departments. His message was clear. True progress required empathy, accountability, and action. As for Officer Karen Hayes, her story became a cautionary tale. Stripped of her badge and facing years behind bars, she faded into obscurity, remembered only as an example of unchecked prejudice and abuse of power. In prison interviews, she occasionally expressed regret, though many doubted the sincerity of her words. Some argued that her downfall offered a valuable lesson, a reminder that authority wielded without compassion could lead to devastating consequences. Others saw her punishment as a necessary step toward dismantling systems that protected bad actors while harming innocent lives. In the town where it all began, things slowly started to shift. Conversations about race and equality became part of everyday discussions, breaking down barriers that had long divided residents. Community leaders organized forums and events to promote understanding, while schools introduced curriculums focused on diversity and inclusion. The local police department underwent significant reforms, implementing stricter oversight mechanisms and prioritizing transparency. Officers were encouraged to engage with the community, attending neighborhood meetings and participating in outreach programs. Slowly but surely, trust began to rebuild. For Maya, the journey wasn't easy, but it was meaningful. She grew her hair back over time, each strand symbolizing resilience and renewal. On days when memories of the incident threatened to overwhelm her, she reminded herself of how far she'd come and how much farther she still wanted to go. Her story had sparked a movement, inspiring countless others to speak out against injustice and demand better from those in positions of power. Years later, as Maya stood on stage accepting an award for her activism, she reflected on everything she'd endured. Looking out at the crowd, she saw faces filled with hope and determination, the same emotions that had carried her through her darkest moments. "This isn't just my victory," she said, her voice steady and strong. "It belongs to every person who refused to stay silent, who chose to fight for a better future. Together, we can create a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect." And as applause filled the room, it was clear that Maya's story wasn't just one of survival. It was a testament to the power of courage, unity, and unwavering faith in the possibility of change. Officer Karen Hayes' attempt at redemption fell flat almost immediately. Her public apology, delivered in a carefully scripted statement, was met with widespread skepticism and outright rejection. "I regret any pain I may have caused," she said, her voice devoid of genuine emotion. But the words felt hollow, especially to those who had watched Maya's tearful interviews or heard Judge Thompson's impassioned speeches. Critics were quick to point out that Karen still refused to take full responsibility for her actions, instead framing them as a simple misunderstanding. Judge Thompson wasted no time addressing her apology. During an appearance on a popular morning talk show, he looked directly into the camera and said, "An apology means nothing if it isn't backed by real remorse and action." Officer Hayes can say sorry all she wants, but until she acknowledges the harm she caused and works to educate herself about the communities she swore to serve, her words are meaningless. His response resonated deeply with viewers, many of whom shared his frustration. Social media exploded with memes and commentary mocking Karen's half-hearted attempt to save face. Meanwhile, Maya began stepping into the spotlight, using her voice to share her story and advocate for change. At first, speaking publicly terrified her. The thought of reliving that day filled her with dread, but she soon realized her experience could inspire others. In interviews, she spoke candidly about the humiliation and fear she felt when her hair was shaved off. "It wasn't just about my hair," she explained. "It was about being treated like I didn't matter, as if my identity was something to erase." Her courage struck a chord with people across the country, sparking conversations about cultural sensitivity and respect. Maya's bravery encouraged others to come forward with their own stories of mistreatment at the hands of law enforcement. A flood of testimonials poured in from individuals who had endured similar abuses, some involving racial profiling, others linked to excessive force. Many recounted how they had stayed silent out of fear or because they believed no one would listen. Now, empowered by Maya's example, they demanded accountability not only for Karen but for the broken system that enabled officers like her to act without consequence. Karen, now ostracized and vilified, struggled to cope with the backlash. Her attempts to justify her behavior only fueled further outrage. In one particularly tone-deaf interview, she argued that shaving Maya's hair was no big deal and suggested critics were overreacting. The comment ignited fresh waves of anger, with hashtags like #Karen still doesn't get it trending online. Even some of her former allies turned against her, calling her remarks insensitive and self-serving. As the trial approached, prosecutors unveiled damning evidence that sealed Karen's fate. Body cam footage, witness testimonies, and internal documents revealed a pattern of misconduct stretching back years. Each revelation chipped away at whatever credibility Karen had left. By the time opening statements began, public opinion had shifted decisively against her. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse daily, holding signs that read "Justice for Maya" and "No more excuses." Throughout the proceedings, Maya remained steadfast, attending every hearing alongside her father. Though the process was emotionally draining, she drew strength from the support of her family and community. Friends, activists, and even strangers sent messages of encouragement, reminding her that she wasn't fighting alone. For Karen, however, there was no such solace. As the trial progressed, it became clear that her career, and possibly her freedom, was hanging by a thread. In the end, Karen's downfall served as a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked prejudice and abuse of power. While she clung to excuses and deflections, Maya and her supporters focused on creating meaningful change. The contrast between their approaches highlighted a broader truth. Redemption requires more than empty words. It demands accountability, humility, and a willingness to learn. And for Karen, it seemed, that lesson had come far too late. The trial against Officer Karen Hayes became a landmark moment, drawing national attention and symbolizing the fight for justice in cases of police misconduct. Held in a packed courtroom, the proceedings were broadcast live, with millions tuning in to witness what many hoped would be a turning point in holding law enforcement accountable. The air was thick with tension as prosecutors presented their case, laying bare the evidence that painted Karen's actions as both cruel and unjustifiable. Prosecutors methodically walked the jury through the events of that fateful day, using bodycam footage to highlight every aggressive word and unnecessary action. They called witnesses who had seen the incident firsthand, including bystanders whose voices trembled as they recounted the shock and horror of watching Maya's hair being shaved off. One woman, clutching tissues, told the court, "It felt like we were watching someone destroy a piece of her soul right in front of us." Her testimony brought tears to Maya's eyes, but also strengthened the resolve of those fighting for accountability. Judge Elijah Thompson played a pivotal role during the trial, not as a participant, but as a guiding force behind the scenes. He worked closely with legal teams to ensure transparency and fairness, while advocating for systemic reforms. His presence loomed large over the case, serving as a reminder of the stakes involved. When called to testify, he spoke with calm authority, explaining how incidents like this perpetuate cycles of mistrust between marginalized communities and law enforcement. "This isn't just about one officer or one victim," he said. "It's about addressing the root causes of injustice, so no child has to endure what my daughter did." Karen's defense team struggled to counter the overwhelming evidence against her. Their attempts to portray her actions as a lapse in judgment rather than deliberate cruelty fell flat, especially when internal documents reveal a history of complaints against her. Each allegation, dismissed or ignored at the time, was dissected in court, painting a damning portrait of repeated misconduct. Even some of Karen's former colleagues testified against her, describing how she often boasted about teaching people lessons during routine stops. After weeks of emotional testimonies and heated arguments, the jury reached a verdict: guilty on multiple counts, including assault and abuse of power. Gasps filled the courtroom as the judge announced Karen's sentence: several years in prison and permanent disqualification from working in law enforcement. For many, it was a rare victory in the battle against police brutality, offering a glimmer of hope that accountability was possible. But the case didn't end there. Judge Thompson used the momentum to push for broader reforms within the department. He spearheaded initiatives aimed at improving training programs, increasing community oversight, and implementing stricter protocols for handling complaints against officers. Local officials, eager to restore public trust, embraced these changes, vowing to make the town a model for other jurisdictions. For Maya, the verdict brought a sense of closure, but also renewed purpose. She began speaking at rallies and conferences, sharing her story to inspire others to stand up against injustice. Her courage earned her recognition as a voice for change, and she found solace in connecting with others who had faced similar struggles. Together, they formed networks of support, determined to break the cycle of fear and silence. As Karen was led away in handcuffs, the courtroom erupted in applause, a cathartic release after months of tension. Outside, crowds cheered, holding signs that read "Justice prevails" and "Change starts now." It was a powerful moment, proof that collective action could lead to real consequences. Yet even as celebrations unfolded, Judge Thompson reminded everyone that the work wasn't done. "This is just the beginning," he said. "We must continue to demand better, not just for Maya, but for every person who deserves to live without fear." In the days that followed, the town began to heal, slowly but surely. Conversations about race, respect, and responsibility took center stage, fostering understanding where division once thrived. And though scars remained, the seeds of change had been planted, watered by courage, resilience, and an unwavering belief in justice.